In this video, we are going to take a look at the Canon RF 50mm f1.2L, which is a very wide aperture lens designed for Canon's RF mirrorless mount. It's also really heavy, weighing in at just over 2 pounds, but the rendering is one of the best that I have seen on any 50mm lens. So is it worth the weight and cost for a premium prime lens? We are going to break that down in this video. This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. So we're talking about a 50mm prime lens. This is considered by many to be what we call a standard or normal focal length. It's definitely not a wide angle, but you get a nice field of view, and it's versatile enough to even go into portrait territory. It's an excellent prime lens with a lot of versatility, despite the fact that it is a fixed focal length. This particular lens has a maximum aperture value of f1.2, so it's going to give you a lot of extra performance if you shoot in low light conditions. It also features a very shallow depth of field, so if you like a lot of separation from your subject and your background, you're going to be able to get that even at medium or even long range distances. It's a very versatile lens, but unfortunately it's also a very difficult lens to design without a bunch of flaws in it. So as a result, we have a lens that is really big, it's pretty heavy, and it's also fairly expensive, so it becomes a little bit specialty. At the time I'm filming this video, this is the only native RF mount 50mm lens in Canon's lineup. I would totally expect them to, over the next couple years, flush that out a little bit more. In the EF lineup, there's always been 3 or 4 50mm to choose from. There's been several different versions of the f1.8 that is very reasonably priced. They go up in price as that maximum aperture increases. You have an f1.4, you also have an f1.2L lens, which is excellent. And at one point they made a 1.0, but they don't anymore. It had some weird issues with it. So this is kind of what we're seeing as a resurgence with Canon with their premier 50mm lens. So if we compare the RF 50mm 1.2 to the EF 50mm 1.2, there's a considerable size difference, weight difference, and the RF version is about double the price, but it does render beautifully. So in my testing, I found that this lens can be really sharp. In fact, I think it kind of goes into Zeiss Otis territory sometimes, which is a lens that's about double the cost and doesn't have autofocus. But let's be honest, you're not gonna buy a 1.2 lens to stop it down and shoot sharp. You're buying it to shoot wide open, and wide open is where this lens shines. It is absolutely gorgeous. It's got a beautiful rendering to it that becomes almost abstract. You've got a really close focal distance of just over a foot, and so when you get close to subjects and you really separate them out from the background, it really does some beautiful things with the way it renders. There is some vignetting and light fall off with this lens when you shoot it wide open. In fact, it really doesn't start to disappear until around f2.8. It's pretty much gone by f4. I don't think that's a huge issue with a lens like this because a lot of people do like the vignetting for a bit of a creative effect, and it is completely correctable in Lightroom or Capture One, but just know that it is there. I talk a lot about field curvature in my lens reviews, and this is more common on zoom lenses or wider angle lenses, but essentially what this means is when you have a field of focus, what is in focus depending on your f-stop, and particularly if it's very shallow, if you have field curvature, this means that parts of that field might be out of focus because it's not exactly flat. I am impressed with what they've done with the 50mm f1.2. This one is amazing. It's probably one of the straightest fields I've ever seen. It is very sharp. As I mentioned, the 50mm f1.2 is a massive lens, and it is filled with glass. There are 15 elements here in 9 groups. You have one ultra dispersion element, one a spherical element, a 10-blade rounded diaphragm, which is really nice. If you stop down and you want to keep spherical highlights round in your background, this does the trick pretty well. The front element is a fairly reasonable size, and you can see that the rear element sits all the way at the back of the lens, so it's pretty much as close to the sensor as it can get with this lens design. Now, the reason this lens is larger, it uses more glass, and it's about double the price of the Canon EF 50mm 1.2L will become more apparent when we look at the MTF charts. You're going to see that the MTF charts for the RF version are on the left. I have the EF version on the right. We do have better edge-to-edge sharpness as you move across the frame. The other interesting note is there is some astigmatism and probably lateral chromatic aberration because you see the sagittal and meridial lines crossing at 30mm line pairs, and this is corrected in the RF 50mm 1.2L. And you can also see that we do have a bump in resolution with the RF version of this lens. Now, when we look at the line pairs, the red lines are taken at 10 line pairs per millimeter, the blue are taken at 30. We typically look at the red lines, lines, or this lower resolution, for sharpness, and then we take the blue lines in terms of resolution because it's a much tighter detail, and you can see there is a massive bump, not only corner to corner, but in general. This lens is sharp, and of course these lines generally will go up higher as you stop down. MTF charts are made with the lens wide open at f1.2. This is a really sharp lens, and you can see that as detailed in the images. Of course, if you like to shoot wide open, the bokeh in this lens is beautiful. When you look at the large spherical highlights, they are well rounded. There is no onion skinning. It is just a really soft, gorgeous lens with a really nice contrast to the sharp areas. Also impressive to me with this lens is the autofocus. It's surprisingly fast when you consider how big this lens is. A lot of high-end lenses that are designed to get rid of all the imperfections and give you maximum sharpness and beautiful bokeh, they are usually designed without autofocus at all. Like the Zeiss Otis series are all manual focus. For one, it puts more into the lens and can add to the weight, and two, you have a lot of elements in there and it becomes kind of difficult to move things quickly. And while I would not consider the EOS R to be a speed demon with autofocus, I thought it performed very well, and it's a really nice feature to actually have on a lens like this. I want to give a shout out to our show sponsor today, who are the awesome folks over at squarespace.com. Present your photography using Squarespace's modern professional portfolios. The layouts are completely customizable, and you can use Squarespace's drag and drop based backend system, which is really easy to use to present your work the way that you want it seen. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform for building beautiful websites, easily claiming your domain or URL, and creating a custom site that brings your ideas to life. Squarespace is host to a number of other tools, including e-commerce, appointment scheduling, and analytics, so that you can grow your brand and your following. So head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, you can go to squarespace.com/AOP to save an additional 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Once again, that is squarespace.com/AOP, and I want to thank the folks at Squarespace for sponsoring another episode of The Art of Photography. So my overall impressions on this lens is I was very impressed. Now, there are some downsides as well. First of all, it's a massive lens. It's very heavy, and it's also pretty expensive. But I think more importantly is the weight of this lens and the size of this lens keep it from being a lens that you could walk around and do street photography or candids with, because it becomes very obtrusive. It becomes very obvious that you're a photographer there shooting. That can kind of ruin your mood a little bit, and it's just really heavy to carry around, and it's also expensive. But if you're willing to put up with that and you have a limited use for this, maybe you shoot a lot of studio or you go to the gym and work out a lot and the weight's not an issue, then you're really going to love this lens. I mean, the results are definitely worth it. It just, for me, limits its use a little bit from an everyday carry lens to something that you would only use in specific situations. However, the image quality almost makes it worth it. And I want to say this too, I'm really not a big fan of the EOS R camera. It's okay. I think the image quality is decent. It's just a little bit strange in some areas. But what was really cool about using this lens and some of the other ones that I've tried that are designed for RF is it shows that Canon is committed to this system and committed to mirrorless, and we are going to see better cameras. In fact, I would go on a limb, and if really optical quality is your biggest concern as a photographer and you want a lens that's going to render differently and better than anything else, it's almost worth buying an EOS R or an RP just to have as a body to use these lenses with. They really are that good. And as I mentioned, it's expensive, and there aren't any other 50mm options in native RF format. Right now, the only options that you've got if you want to go 50mm and less expensive is to use the adapter and use those lenses, which works just fine too. Of course, there's more lenses that will be coming, but I think it's worth noting that this is really the only option at this point. It's still a new system that has yet to be developed through. On that note, I really like this lens. I would love to know what you guys think, so drop me a comment below. I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, later.